I'm really excited to be here presenting to you around DevOps and Visual Studio Team Services. Now, I've got quite an extensive demo here today. I'm going to try and take you from scratch to full continuous delivery, so we'll see how we go. Given the presentation gods are with me, but if you can just keep the questions all the way to the end to keep my flow going, or else I'll be outside after the demo, and feel free to come and have a chat to me. All right, so let's get into the introduction slide first. Who am I and why am I up here talking in front of you today? So I work and live in Wellington, and I work for a great company down there called Equinox IT. And what's unique about Equinox is they're New Zealand's only gold partner in the application lifecycle management space. And what that means, this space is transforming to realign with the market later this year, and it's actually going to be called DevOps. So as you can imagine, it's a very exciting space to play in right now. So part of my role at Equinox, and because of the relationship with Microsoft, is I find myself being a P seller for Microsoft, which gets me a bit of a funny look every now and then when I go and introduce myself to clients. But what that effectively means is that I'm a partner seller. So I go into clients and I talk to them about their DevOps journey, about their transition, and also about extracting as much value as I can out of the tool that I'm going to demo to you today. So just before we get started, there's two tools here, and for those of you who are going to be inspired by what I've got to show you and want to go home and pick one of these up yourself or deploy it into your own organization like we heard this morning at the keynote, you've got two choices, Team Services or Team Foundation Server. Now, Team Foundation Server's been around a while, and that's your on-premise version. So if you have data sovereignty issues, or if your organization's not quite ready to go to the cloud yet, hey, Team Foundation Server's right for you. If not, Team Services is your deal. Team Services sits on top of a SQL Server database, and it sits on Azure. So you get all the power and all the security that's offered there with Microsoft Azure. Okay, so let's start and have a chat about what DevOps actually is, and also what this thing is on the screen here behind me. So this up here is a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and it's quite a fascinating plane in that it's 20% more fuel efficient than its predecessor, the 767. And what effectively that means is that in the coming years, it's going to completely wipe the 767 out of the market. What's also unique about this plane is it wasn't assembled like traditional planes. They didn't pull all the resources and all the people into one factory and just build the thing. They actually sub-assembled it all around the world. So we had a wing built over here, we had a tail built over there, and then we had 1,200 engineers in Seattle that worked in the Everett factory, and they actually assembled this thing. But you might not care so much about that. That might just be all fluff to you. But I think when you dive a little deeper and actually think about what you do care about, it might just be the safety or the performance of the plane that gets you from A to B. But in retrospect, I actually think that you probably care about the way that the mechanical engineers and the electrical engineers assembled the plane, that they actually had a shared context of each other's domains when they went to construct it. When they went to do the telemetry, that is feeding the environmental condition data from the wing all the way through to the cockpit, to the pilots, the operations guys, I bet you want that to be accurate and have 100% uptime. And then if we think of the aeronautical engineers and the pilots, we probably would hope that they would have got together before we started building this thing and actually talk to each other about the pain points that the operations guys feel when they go through and fly this thing. That's the pilots, that is. And that the aeronautical engineers actually provided them proper documentation. So if the pilots found themselves in some strife, they could refer to that documentation, and it was actually accurate, it was readable. And isn't that the space that we find ourselves in with DevOps today? At least with every organization that I go into, there's a fundamental disconnect between the development and the operations team. They're siloed apart from each other, and there's generally a conflict. Because of all the history that's gone on, they just don't get along. So what is DevOps, and why is it trying to address this problem? So look, I'm going to approach this from what DevOps means to me. Obviously, I work in an enterprise context down in Wellington. generally facing government organisations, but this is what DevOps means to me, because it's a pretty hot topic right now, and again, I think it's very much context dependent. You'll have your web organisations that think DevOps is deploying into production every single minute or every single time someone pushes code. This is DevOps to me. So what is DevOps to me? Well, it's generally what it says on the tin. It's the combination of developer and operations together, having a shared context that's really centered around our end user. So no longer do they just care about my space and they just care about, do they just care about the development space and they just care about the operations space? They actually care about the whole journey because their ultimate focus is that delivery and that end value to our end customer. And that should be easy, right? Because when we look at it and when we look at the actual operations that they perform, developers or our actual development team really perform a delivery function. They build software and they get it into a deliverable state. And then they hand it over somehow to the support guys, who are the operations guys. These are the guys that are in charge of standing the thing up and keeping it running throughout its lifetime. And when we look at the middle sections, what goes into a software application, we actually find that there's a lot of shared context here. So why is there this fundamental disconnect and almost this chaotic fighting going on between these two silos? Well, I think it has a lot to do with the software development industry view. And that's kind of where we are. That's where we've come from. So 10 years ago, I wasn't in software. But from what I've heard and what I get told, it was a very sort of frantic time. It was pretty gnarly going out and building applications. So then we started introducing things like extreme programming, Scrum, Kanban, Agile, Lean. And we got really good at developing software, taking a customer's requirement and developing a piece of software to meet those requirements. But what we forgot about is the deployment aspect. We got it to a nearly deployed state. And code that's sitting on a staging server for 6 months, waiting for us to pull the resources together so we can actually go forward and deliver the thing, it's not valuable. It's pretty impressive. Like, I might be impressed by it. I might look at your code and go, wow, that's an elegant method, or that's a good class structure. You're using domain-driven design. But there's no value in that until it's actually sitting in front of the customers that are giving me money or the end users at the end of the day. So generally, when I go into organizations and talk to them about their DevOps journey, I come across sort of 2 versions of this. Number one is we have a delivery team and they rack up changes and they kind of deliver their code and they get to this wall of confusion and then they go back and they develop a bit more and then they go back and they develop a bit more. And it gets to a point where we have 6 months to a year's worth of changes sitting on a staging server waiting to be deployed into production. And they've hit this wall of confusion where they kind of go, okay, we're going to hand it to the ops guys now, but the ops guys are busy firefighting or doing whatever they're doing, and we don't really have any context of what's going on there. Like, for me personally as a developer, I had no real context of what was going on there. I used to look across my open plan office at the ops guys and kind of think, what do those guys do all day? What are we paying them for? Like, they only have to stand up an application once, and then it's software. Once it's up and running, shouldn't it just stay running? And the other sort of scenario that I come across is when we get into a scenario where we have a project manager that's kind of managing this project, and all of a sudden he's under some time pressures. So he starts rushing his delivery team. And when he rushes them on and they get to this wall of confusion, what's he chopped out to make his deadline? He's probably chopped out things like proper debugging. He's probably chopped out things like telemetry. He's definitely chopped out documentation, because I see it all the time. And then he hands this thing over to an ops guy or an ops team and says, hey guys, can you just stand this up and make it run for me and keep it running? And then what happens? Chaos ensues. So I just want to spend a minute diving a little bit deeper into the operations that our dev team and our ops team perform. And really, the way that I think of it is our dev team really performs a delivery function. And what goes into delivery? Well, it's everything that's involved in getting a new feature to an end user. So that's the whole software development lifecycle. That's your analysis, test, development, QA, your deployment, yes, your deployment, and your documentation. And then if we look at support, it's everything involved in keeping a feature up and available to an end user. So that comes under things like provisioning, the administration, the incidents, problems, defects, the patching, and the monitoring of our software. So to summarize, it should be easy, right? DevOps is what it says on the tin. Development, operations, DevOps. Or, my way of thinking about it, delivery, support, DevOps. But it's not that easy. I can see a lot of you saying to me, well, hey, look, that sounds good in principle, and this DevOps thing sounds really good, but I can't stick these two teams together because they really don't get along. And I can't just tell them, okay, here's a tool, VSTS or whatever your tool may be, and okay, now you have the shared context and the shared goal of standing code up and making it available to an end user, and that's what you both work towards. We've got this cultural disconnect. And that's kind of what I have to put back on you guys and go, unless you're paying big money to a change management consultancy, you have to implement this change in your organizations yourself. DevOps is really, I guess as Microsoft defines it, it's the combination of people, process, and tools to continuously deliver value to the end users. And it kind of goes in that order. If you put a process in place or you put a tool in place and you haven't sorted the people aspect out, then you're kind of bound to fail. So looking at those, I guess, the cultural observations that I find, really, with our delivery guys, traditionally they've had no control after delivery, so they have no focus on the customer experience after the point in time where they think that they've delivered working software. They think their job's done, it hasn't gone into production, it's gone through UAT, and however rigorous that may be, if we're rushed, it's probably not that rigorous, and it gets in front of a customer, and then they have no context after that. They kind of think, hey, my job's done. And then our support guys, they're frustrated because they've never had any context before delivery. So they've had no focus on making sure that the product was what the customer needed. They've had no focus on making sure this thing's stable in a production environment. They just get given code and told, hey, stand it up, deal with it. So to summarize, DevOps is really about bringing those two focuses together and having one team focus on a shared understanding of accountability for the cycle time, for the whole life cycle. So it drives a change in focus to customer experience. And again, this is kind of something that I have to put back on you guys and your organizations and say, you kind of have to figure this stuff out. There's a lot of documentation out there, a lot of articles, but really you have to figure this stuff out or your DevOps change is not going to go so smooth. Just a quick note on work management and complexity, and it's going to get a little bit deep here, but stick with me. So this is the Cynefin model by a man called Dave Snowden. And on the left-hand side, we have the obvious and complicated quadrants. And these are the ordered quadrants, and it really gives us context. It gives us a context of understanding about the decisions we can make within the given context we find ourselves in. On the complex and chaotic side, the right-hand side, this is our non-ordered side. So this is when the relationship between cause and effect can only be understood after the fact. So it's a very spontaneous, reactionary place to be in. When we apply it to a software context, our obvious quadrant, that's where we might see things like our level 1 support. These are our guys that pick up the phone, they follow a transcript, and they go along a certain way of operating. They kind of know what to do. It's very obvious. Complicated's where we thought we could operate in the software development world about 10 years ago. That's when we had stuff like waterfall, the big design up front, and we thought, hey, look, we can really put a lot of thinking into this complicated problem, come up with a solution for our customer, and hopefully they like it. What we've really found is that software delivery really sits in the complex space. When we go DevOps, our team is focused around the whole software development lifecycle. That includes deployment, that includes defects in deployment. So we need cross-functional developers, we need cross-functional delivery teams. We need to be able to pull those guys out because they have context over what they've written and they're going to jump over and they're going to help the ops guys out. So we can't just rely on these guys having fixed time periods of, okay, do your development and we'll leave you alone. And when a production defect happens, hey, we'll just sort it out when it happens. Sorry, we'll get onto that soon. And then we have the chaotic quadrant. And this is where things like when a server goes down or when we have a P1 defect, it's just operate. Don't think, just operate. Do whatever to try and push ourselves back into that complicated space. Now I want to get a bit controversial here and kind of debunk Scrum in a DevOps context, because if we take waterfall and we shrink it down into very small iterations and we define a sprint backlog, and then we say to our team, okay, you're going to operate within the sprint backlog, and as long as we're following pure Scrum, we're not allowed to add anything to it. That's kind of where we find ourselves in a Scrum world. It's defined, so it doesn't really work in DevOps, because if we have a defect or if we have an issue that we need to respond to, we can't just go and chuck it in the bottom of that of that sprint backlog. We have to wait until all of the tasks in that sprint backlog have been complete. So on an alternative side, I really think that something like Kanban works exceptionally well in a DevOps context, because it really allows us to manage a complex system as a complex system. It allows us to reprioritize the backlog whenever we like. It allows us to rush things through. It allows us to be cross-functional and spike when we need to on things like production defects. So just to summarize, DevOps is completely reinventing the way we run our businesses. We no longer can accept that we have a delivery team and then an operations team or a support team sitting outside. These guys need to be cross-functional. They need to be engaging with each other. They need to be attending the same stand-ups. They need to have a care and a whole holistic view about the whole software development lifecycle, of the whole cycle time metric, which is the time that a feature enters in to the Kanban board and then actually reaches production. So if you've built your 787, but you're waiting on your delivery team, you're waiting on your support team, you're waiting on your operations to actually come along and operate it and fly the thing, you're losing out to the competitive advantage that your competitors have right now, which is the DevOps competitive advantage. They're out there flying their plane already. They're delivering end value to their consumers, and if you're not there with them, very soon they're going to be long gone. And it's going to be just like the Uber and the taxi story. It's gone. You'll never catch it. So, to summarize with the great words of the man behind me, it's not the biggest and it's not the strongest organizations that will last the test of time. It's really the ones that can respond to change. And that's when I want to take a bit of a pivot here and jump into the VSTS tool and have a look at how VSTS can increase the flow of value within our organizations, can really increase the flow of value to our end consumers and respond to the DevOps change that's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from scratch and try and take us all the way from just creating a MVC application in Visual Studio and get it to continuous delivery, the point of continuous delivery. That is a complete shortening of all the cycle times. Now that's not to say that there'll be no checks and balances along the way, but we'll be looking at optimizing resources as well. We'll be looking at pulling out our manual regression testers that continually enter the same numbers into the same checkbox because we don't have unit tests written. We'll be looking at improving the quality of our software and the availability of it because we're able to continuously deploy into production, which opens us up to things like hypothesis-driven development and continuous learning. So again, the process that I want to follow, and this might be one that you follow next week in your organizations, is you take your delivery team and you kind of say, okay, we've been operating in an agile way. We kind of want to test this DevOps thing out. What does it look like? These are kind of the steps that I'm going to go through. And if you just take a small application and you put it on VSTS and you just try it out, and then again, VSTS is free for up to 5 users, or if you're an MSDN subscriber, which most people that have Visual Studio licenses within their organizations are, then they get VSTS for free. Each user on there, as long as they're an MSDN subscriber, it's free. So you'll go through your version control, build, unit test, on and on until you hit continuous delivery in your release. So to start off, we're going to start with the delivery team. I'm going to configure some version control, build, and then we'll get to unit test after that. So let's try it out. Okay, so this is the dashboard within Visual Studio Team Services. So this, for those of you that are used to TFS, this is kind of your administration console. It's also your team project collection view. So if you look on the left-hand side here, I learned to use Zoom it 2 days ago, so hopefully I'm stable enough for you guys. On the left-hand side here, here's all our projects. So I've created quite a few, but I'm just going to jump up and create a new project. And then it's going to jump me over to this page here. So I'll just enter a name and a description. And then what it's going to do is it's going to ask me about a process template. Now this is kind of Microsoft's view of the way that organizations act. And a process template we can think about as the building blocks for what we're going to see inside Visual Studio Team Services. So things like a UI layer, but also it's going to be the workflow layer. So we've got three choices here. We've got Agile, CMMI, and Scrum. CMMI is the Capability Maturity Management Model Index, I think. And that's a very process-heavy template. That's for when we're operating in a very waterfall-like fashion or very process-heavy. And then we've also got Scrum and Agile. Now the differences that we're going to see versus Scrum and Agile, firstly, are the words. So of course with Agile we're going to get things like user stories and issues. With Scrum we're going to get things like a product backlog item and an impediment. It's also going to change the way our work's recorded. So with Scrum, it's only going to record remaining work because that's all we care about in a Scrum world. With Agile, it's going to care about our estimated work, our remaining work, and also our completed work. So I'm going to pick Agile here. And then also, it comes down and it asks me to select a version control. Now, the funny thing about the new Microsoft is that Git, the open source version control, is the default selection here. And actually, if you read the documentation online, it's the one they recommend. So they've kind of gone away from Team Foundation version control. They're kind of giving the power back to you as in the open source world. I really like Git. I started in a web development context, so Git for me is fully distributed, and what that means is that every developer has the full local repository on their machine. So that's really helpful for specifically when they're working offline, or say they want to roll back to a change 2 years ago and see the software at the state it was in 2 years ago. They have the power to do that because they have the full repository and the changes for all time sitting on their machine. So I'm going to go with Git, and I'm going to create that project here. So what it's doing now is it's reaching out to Azure and saying, hey, give me a SQL Server database within this team project collection. Configure a team project on there and spin it up. And then it's going to tell me that I'm absolutely going to love it, which I do, and I'll navigate to the project. And the first board we're going to see is the board that your team members are going to see in the morning. This is the dashboard, and this is where we can configure. That window is going to pop up, don't worry about that. With the dashboard, that's where we configure the metrics that we want to be in our team spaces. So again, all about providing that fast feedback to our developers or to our delivery team. We can put things like, hey, let's have a bar graph of what the latest builds look like. Let's have a pie chart of new features and the bugs that were introduced in those new features. Or let's have a query tile which says, hey, how many new items does the developer that's looking at this screen now, how many work items does he have open? Now, Visual Studio Team Services is pretty smart. It's recognized that I have no work and also no code in there. So it's asking me whether I'd like to do either of those things. And I would, so I'm going to jump into the Manage Code window. And that's going to jump me into the Kanban board that Visual Studio Team Services gives you out of the box. Now, this is fully configurable. So again, it can model what your business requirements are. Up on the left-hand side here, we can see that we've got features and user stories. We're also able to display things like epics. We're also able to display things like tasks. And we're not constrained to the new, active, resolved, and closed that we've got at the moment. These are only states, so it's assuming that we'd like them. But I'm going to jump in there and do a bit of configuration. So I'll just head over to this cog here, click that down. I'm going to want to choose Show the ID because I want to see the work item ID. Pretty much the tickets on my board, they're given a specific ID, and I'll get on to talking about work items in just a second. Then I'm also going to jump down just to my columns. And this isn't the way I'm used to operating, so I'll add a couple of new columns there, and I'll call this one Dev, and I'll call this one Test, QA, and we should probably have a analysis column here. Now we can also enforce WIP limits, which are really handy. So in my dev column, I've got devs that like to grab more candy than they can get through in a day off the board. So I want to restrict that to 2 items a day. So please only have that in the columns. And then as well, I can split the columns into doing and done. And just from an Agile perspective, I really recommend that you guys do this. The reason why we split the columns into doing and done is because Kanban is fundamentally a pull-based system. It's not a push-based system. So if we've got WIP limits that are controlling the amount of work that can be in our backlog at one time, or the amount of work that can be pushed through our board, because we want to focus developers, or we want to focus our whole delivery team on the fact that they need to stop starting and start finishing work, we really want that doing and done column, because they can move something into the done column, and then the guys in the next column over, let's say dev and test, the testers can then jump into the done column of the developers and pull a card across instead of their WIP limits being totally destroyed because the developers are just pushing work at them. So again, Kanban, very much a pull-based system. And then I can jump down, I can configure things like a cumulative flow diagram. So again, this diagram is really important within an Agile world. It models our cycle time, which is the metric we care about. It will show us a breakdown of how long things have taken to enter the board and actually get out on the other side. So that's probably about enough configuration for me at the moment. I'll just jump down here and save. And then my board's going to change. So let's start from a feature level, and let's just add a new feature and say we want to add some code. And then what we can do is we can just left click on this feature and we can add a user story, and we can go push initial code. And then if we just jump down into our story board here, our story Kanban board, we can click on this. And this is the work item that I've been mentioning. So a work item is a great thing within Team Services and Team Foundation Server. It's effectively every metric that your business wants to track inside of a ticket. So it actually takes tickets from just being an item of work and expands and puts metrics inside of them so we can have all sorts of things. And I'll talk you through a few quickly. So we can put a description in here. We can have an acceptance criteria that goes on top of our definition of done. We can also have a conversation with any of our team members. So if I just use the @ symbol, it drops down a list of the team members. So I can jump in there and say something like, how does this look? Also, we've got story points, priority, risk in here, a lot of new things. We've got a parent, so we can see that this is connected to the feature we added. If we jump over here into the link tab, we can also see the feature that this user story is linked to. Now, links, we can add links all throughout our work items, and what they do is they provide a really rich web of traceability. So when we go through and do some heavy queries within Visual Studio Team Services, we can really get a rich analytics set. We can also go through and see a complete history of anything within our work items. So you can see that I've added it there and just a couple of the configurations that I've done to it. And also up here, we can attach things. So if we have things like a wireframe for a UI ticket, we can add that there. We can also follow stuff. So if I click this button here, whenever any analytic within this work item changed, it's going to ping me an email and say, this has changed. You might want to go and have a look at it. So I'll just save and close that and then jump into my code tab. Now this is a view that you're only ever going to get once, and it's going to be when there's no code sitting inside your repository. One of the key things to note here with Visual Studio Team Services is that you have unlimited Git repositories on this platform. So if you're paying for something like GitHub at the moment, which is $7 a week for $7 a month for an individual, $84 a year, or $300 a year for an enterprise, it's an instant saving if you go and chuck your code in this repository and it sits inside the security that is Microsoft Azure. So just something to think about. Also, we might see a few funny icons on the screen. Coming from a .NET world, what is this Eclipse thing, or Android Studio, or IntelliJ? And then if I jump up the top here, and I just click down here, we can see things like PHP, Python, Ruby, WebStorm. So again, this is what Donovan was talking about at the keynote this morning. This is the Microsoft that will play with any tool you bring, any language you bring. So it's any platform, any language, they'll make it work. You decide. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump into Visual Studio. That's going to be the example I'm going to use here. And it's just going to come up on the side here and say, hey, look, would you like to clone this repository? So those of you that are familiar with Git, you'll be familiar with what I'm doing here. So it's got the URL of my Git repository on Team Foundation server, also the local repo that's going to be on my machine. I'll quickly clone that. And then it's going to say, you don't have anything in there. Would you like to create a new solution? I sure would. And I'll jump across to this window. We'll just create a ASP.NET web application, call it Ignite. And over here on the side, we can see things like application insights. So this is that telemetry that I keep on talking about. I'm not going to dive too deeply into this in this demo, but on Friday morning at 10:30, there's a talk on this. If you're looking to move into the DevOps world, really recommend you go and listen to that talk. So I'll just leave that off for the purposes of speed at the moment. Go OK. MVC is going to be fine, and I won't put it up to Azure at the moment. Let's create this. It'll be a window most of you are familiar with. Okay, and now I have some of the functionality that we start getting within Team Explorer. So if we jump into Team Explorer, we've got a Git repository configured. If we jump into changes, all of a sudden it pops up and it says, hey, look, how would you like Git to recognize you as? So we've got a name in there, and we've also got an email address that it can contact you on. Yep, I'm pretty happy with that. And then we can see all our changes, and then we can also add a commit message. So pushing initial code up to team services. Now, one of the things I've done here is kind of the Fight Club rule of never talk about Fight Club within Git. Never push to master. Never ever push to master. I'm initializing this repository for the first time, and for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to break that rule, but when I go back and change this, I'll definitely branch. Okay, so we'll just commit that. And it's committing my changes there. And then it's going to do this funny thing for those of you who are not used to Git within Visual Studio, is it's going to say, would you like to sync? And what sync literally is it's a pull and a push at the same time, and it just looks for any merge conflicts. So we'll go through and we'll do that. Cool, and it's not found anything, and then I can literally push up to my current branch. And because I'm on master, I'm just going to push directly into my master branch. And there we go, it's pushed. So let's jump back into Team Services and have a look what we can see up there now. Okay, so if I just refresh this page, all of a sudden we can see our Git repository sitting on Visual Studio Team Services. And the thing I want you guys to note about this isn't Microsoft's flavor of Git. This is not some special version of Git. This is native Git sitting on Azure. Now, again, Team Services is pretty smart for us newbies, and it's saying, hey, look, you don't currently have a build definition in there. Would you like to set up a build? So I sure would, so I'll go ahead and do that. And again, we start seeing things that we're not really familiar with within a .NET world. We see things like Xcode. If I scroll up to the top, we see things that are very Java orientated. I've built a Visual Studio application, so I'm going to see Visual Studio here today. I've also got things like UWP and all of that sort of stuff, or we can go with an empty definition. This is just going to provide me a templated set of steps that I'm going to use to build this application. So I'll click Next, and then it's going to pop up and ask me, hey, look, you've got this repo sitting on Visual Studio Team Services. Would you like to build with that repo? Yes, I would, and I'd like to build out of the master branch. If you're going in there and you have a staging branch or a dev branch that you'd like to run a build against, that's where you can do something like this. And then it's asking me about continuous integration. So again, that fast feedback to our delivery team. If anything's gone wrong, we want them to know instantly. So I'm going to select continuous integration. As soon as they check into the master branch, it's going to kick off a build. And if that build goes wrong, I'll show you how to configure it. So it flicks them an email immediately and it fails the build. So also we're going to be asked about an agent. So within our team services, we've got the ability to go with a hosted or a default agent. Now a hosted agent, the way I like to think about it, is it's a super machine with Visual Studio, the latest version of 2015, 13, 12 and 10, and a whole lot of other software to help you build whatever kind of application you've got. You can jump into the documentation and look what's on a hosted agent. If it doesn't suit you, or if you have a build that processes more than 10 gigs of data, then you're going to need to go for a default agent. It might be the case that you want to choose a default agent anyway, because Visual Studio Team Services is going to start charging you for build minutes after you get past 240. So 240 a month free. I just went over, so I had to put my credit card details in. If not, use your own kit, deploy some default agents. You can have multiple default agents on one machine. And yeah, so I'm going to go with hosted here, and I'll create that build definition. And this is where we really start to see some of the magic out of this team services tool. So over here, if any of you are used to the old XAML builds, it's completely different. So this is the vNext build, and we've got a build step in here for every step that we need to run our build our MVC application that I just built. So we've got things like restoring our NuGet packages, building the solution. We've also got test assemblies. We can jump here and do things like enable code coverage. I can jump into the extra options. There's really a lot that we can go on here. We're also publishing symbol path. So what that does is that creates our PDB file, and that's going to let us debug this application on a machine that hasn't built it. So for example, I'm using a hosted agent here. We're also going to copy our build artifacts to a build staging directory, and that's when we get to the release stage. That's going to reach into our staging folder, and it's going to pull out what it needs to go and deploy to our environments. And then we also have an artifact drop, which is where we'll deploy our artifacts to a file share or a server, so our team members can go and jump in there and get it. The other two things that I just want to focus on here is the options tab. We can come in here and click down, create a work item on failure. And I can select the work item that I'd like to create at the moment. Within Team Services, there's about 14 or so default work items, and these are all configurable. So are the process templates. You're not restricted by them. You can go and clone one of the process templates that you're given, one of the three, and then you can create your own work items off that. So very, very extensible system. I'm just going to leave it as a bug, but the key thing I want to do here is I really want to assign it to the request. I want to assign it to the requester. So that's the person that pushes the build into pushes the code into the master branch. They've effectively requested the build. If the build breaks, it's their fault. The bugs are going to get assigned directly to them, and it's going to appear on the Kanban board. So we can't escape it. It's immediate feedback, and it's obvious. It's in front of all of our team members. We can also jump over to things like triggers. Again, I've got continuous integration set up. If I don't check in code that day, but I still want to run a build, I can jump in here and select scheduled. This one's currently set for 3 a.m. in the morning. I think this will still trigger an email or an alert if the build fails. So if you're the person that configures this, you're the administrator, and you select schedule it at 3 a.m. and your builds are failing, you're probably going to get an email at 3 a.m. every morning, so just be aware of that. I'm not going to schedule the build at this stage, so I'll just leave that alone. Cool, and that looks pretty good to me, apart from the fact that maybe I want to add some more build steps. So I can jump up here to this button and just go add build step, and it's going to open up this window here. And we can see on the left-hand side here, we've got build, utility, test, package, deploy, and a rich, rich feature list of things we can do. Now, if that's not enough for me, I can jump up here onto the marketplace. And this is kind of the open source direction that Microsoft's following in, allowing people to build extensively on top of their products. And hopefully, yep. So what I want you guys to think of this as like, is this is like the app store for DevOps. This is where people are going and building either free integrations or actually paid integrations. You have the ability to do that on top of Visual Studio Team Services. So you can jump through here and there's lots of stuff. We can see Docker, quite a popular one. I've got Octopus Deploy running, which I'm going to use today. There it is down there. There's heaps of this stuff out there. Cool, so I'll leave the build definition alone as it is, and I'll just save that. Let's call it definition 1. Okay. Cool, and then let's see how I've done. One quick thing to touch on is just the security. Security within Team Services is so granular. You can set security and privileges until the cows come home. You shouldn't be worried about the power that your team has to go and deploy things into production or kick off builds whenever they like. Security is so granular, you can literally control whatever they do. So we'll just jump up here and we'll queue a new build. And that looks good, hosted and off the master branch, and we'll kick it off. And what it's going to do here is it's going to reach out to Azure and it's going to say, hey, get me one of those hosted agents that I was talking about. And Azure's going to say, okay, but you're in a queue with the rest of the world. There's many hosted agents out there, so we're just in queue position 1 right now. But we've got to wait a little bit. So again, if you have a default agent, you won't be waiting. Here we go, we've gone green, and things start to happen. So we can see all of our steps over here on the left-hand side, and then we're provided, really, really rich logging of exactly everything that's going on with our Team Services account, with our build. So it's going out there, it's getting the NuGet restore at the moment. Let's resolve the deltas. Starting to build the solution. Okay, now I'll just leave that there at the moment. That's going to go ahead and build. Oh. But if I pull my slides back up, so we've kind of got a build going. Now let's write a test. So we'll go to the next phase. So we'll write a test. And we can also write automated acceptance test just for the speed of this demo. I'm just going to write a unit test for you guys. So we'll just jump back into Visual Studio and we'll just go back into our Team Explorer here, and we can just click on branches and we can see that we've got the master branch there. Easy, left click, new local branch, and we'll call it write test. It's going to check out directly off master, and we'll check that branch out. And then we can see that it's a little bit more bold than the other one. It's kind of hard to see sometimes, but it's a little bit more bold, and that means that you're on that branch. Cool, and then we'll just jump across to our Solution Explorer, which climbs straight into the home controller, for example. And we'll use a feature within Visual Studio, which is just going to create me a unit test, and we'll just accept the defaults. Save those changes. Ooh. Now I forgot to do something here, which I should have done. I should have branched. Did I? Ah, I did. Sorry. That's where my head's at right now. Okay. So we'll go back into our Team Explorer. And we'll just go up here to, the home button. We'll click on changes, and we'll see the changes that are there. Of course, we're always going to write a commit message because that's going to let our other team members know what's going on. So home controller test written, and we'll commit all. Would you like to save changes? Yep, absolutely. Now we're going to go into the sync thing again. So it's literally going to look for merge conflicts. And if it hasn't found any, the behavior here is a little bit different. We're actually going to what we call publish a branch. So that's a little bit different for me, coming from a web development background, working with Git on the command line. I never have to publish. But what publish effectively says is Visual Studio's got a local branch, and I'd like to let team services know about it, and I'd like to give it to you, team services. So we'll do that, and it will publish it up there. And then all of a sudden it will say, okay, great, team services has an idea of what that branch is. Would you like to create a pull request? Because of course with Git, we have push-pull motion, and when we push our changes back to them, we ask someone to pull it into the master trunk. We don't push it directly into master. So we'll create a pull request, and that's going to jump this page for me here. Now what I can do here is I can see a copy of my pull request, exactly everything that I've changed. So I can go down, lots of green. I've added a lot of files with my test. But I can also come up here to reviewers and just start typing a name. And there we go. I've added a reviewer, so I've got a code review going on. Now you can enforce this to happen, and you can also enforce who reviews the code within team services. That's going to be okay for me. I'll leave them out. And we can also add work items in there. So I think we were 93, pushing initial code. That looks good to me. We've actually written a test, but and we'll create that new pull request. It's going to jump us out into this window where we can, again, have a full conversation with whoever we like about how it's looking. It's going to send an email to them, let them know we've added a comment there. Or else we can come up, we can either approve with suggestions, wait for author, or reject. I'll just approve it at the moment, and then I'll go to complete. Okay, and that's going to say, would you like to delete the branch after merging? Yes, I would. Complete the merge, and that's going to kick off, and that's now done. If I just click on my build tab, what I can see is a build has kicked off. So we've got continuous integration going on. If we jump in here and just view the results of this build, again, it's going to wait for an available agent. And possibly if I just jump back into the last build I did, here we go. So this completed successfully. Now we didn't have any tests, so I've kind of messed up a bit here, but what I want to show you is the rich feedback you get off your tests. And also this builds on top of the last test it ran. So it provides feedback to your team of, hey look, test last time, they took 10 minutes to run, now they're taking 11 minutes, so we can kind of get some understanding there if we've actually increased the time or not, or induced any bugs. Okay, and it's pretty important that we just wait for this one to finish because of what it's going to do off the back of that failing test. But quickly, what I can do is I can jump you in and show you one of the add-ons that I found in the Team Explorer, Team Services DevOps App Store, the marketplace. So this is quickly an arcade hub that you can go and play with your team members while you're waiting for builds to complete. So that's what we do at Equinox every sort of 2 hours or so when we check in. Okay, have another go on this thing. It records your high score so you can compete against your team members. Okay, and we've got our build going on there again. We can see the stages it's going through. And then it's probably going to have a little bit of a think when it gets to our test. Thinking about it, and here we go, test failed, because of course I just stubbed out a generic test and it had an assert failed on it. So it's just publishing the artifacts to the drop folder, and then it's going to do the cleanup. Okay, now what we can do is we can jump in here and just have a quick look at the display that we get within the continuous integration build about our test. Also, we have bar graphs to show us the test duration and the test failures, whether they're increasing or decreasing, the amount of new bugs that have been added. And if we jump back into our work tab, and we've got our board here, and just jump back into settings, go working with bugs, and actually select bugs appear on the Kanban board, save that. That's created a bug off the back of that build failing, and it's assigned it directly to me because I've broken the build. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is the continuous delivery part of things. This is the release part. So the reason why I've spent quite a bit of time on build and not a whole ton of time on release is we can think of release as literally an extension of build. So it has the same steps involved. The architecture is very similar. We're just performing different steps. We could do all of the steps that we'll find in release within build if we wanted to, but we really want to separate it out because we want our builds to be fast. We want them to provide us with really fast feedback. So we want to do things like running load testing and running pen testing and all the other things that we could do before we release into an environment. We want to do them in our release. But think about them as literally an extension of one another. So I'll go into an empty definition here. Next, again, we can see just go off the build that I've got, or we've got the choice to go Jenkins up here. Now, Microsoft really tout this tool as you choose what you'd like. So it's the full life cycle. Yes, you can go right from adding code right through to continuous delivery, but you don't have to participate in every one of those steps. So I guess Donovan Brown, if you hear him speak, likes to talk about this tool of if you're doing continuous delivery and if you're doing DevOps and you're not using this tool, then you're using a fragmented tool chain. And if you're happy in that world, you're established with something like Jenkins, and you don't want to stop using it, then that's cool. You can use all the other features of team services while still using Jenkins. You can just chop and change out where it happens. We can also select continuous deployment if we'd like to. I don't think that's a great idea at the moment. I'm not going to go for that, but we'll go in and have a look what release looks like. Okay, so this is going to open up a number of environments, but as we can see, the same as build. It's that add task and basically operate on an agent, hosted or local. So I can add a few environments in here. Let's jump out of this view. So just created 4 environments there, nice and easy. Have a dev environment, have a test environment, a QA environment, and of course prod. And then we'll just jump into adding tasks. So I think it's a great thing to use something like Octopus Deploy. It's really popular in the marketplace right now. So let's go and configure that and have a look what that looks like. Okay, so if we just jump up this really convenient window here, we just configured Octopus Deploy in our release steps. So we've got things like package, the Octopus Deploy package. It's taking it out of our staging directory. It's turning it into a NuGet package because that's what Octopus works with. It's pushing the package up to Octopus. It's acting as an orchestrator effectively and saying to Octopus, hey, look, please create the release within yourself on the Octopus server and then deploy it out into your environments. And we can just come up here as easy as create release. It's going to ask us for the release definition. Then it's going to jump up here and say, okay, what successful build would you like to release off? I can select one there. I can jump down. And we're not forced to release into production. Just because we have these environments doesn't mean that we can't put gates on going straight into them. So this one I've got automated. We can also have manual deployments. We can also jump down into our release definition. If I just cancel that quickly. We can also jump down into our release definition. and say assign approvers. So in production, I might not want things just to go straight into production. I might want to do a check before it goes into production. So I can jump down here and assign myself or whoever I want to be. I can just assign a pre-deployment approver or a post-deployment approver. I can also send a notification when things are done. Again, very, very extensible. So if I just kick off a release, the builds are ordered in the date. So I built this one on the 12th of October 2016, and it was build number 2 for the day. That's how it's structured. Again, I can configure this, and I'm just going to create the release. What it's then going to do, it's going to tell me the release has been created. It's going to open up this page here, and again, I can click on logs, and we'll see the same sort of thing. It's going out, getting a hosted agent, and getting it to do its release. So if we fast forward, here's a completed release. So again, we've got complete build logs or deployment logs for absolutely everything that went on in our environments. We've also got blockers for when we insert approvers in there. And yeah, that's release. That's kind of a run through of team services. So just to summarize here, guys. All right, so hopefully that's been kind of a brief run through of Visual Studio Team Services. And again, if you're operating within TFS, it's going to be the same context. All of the things I did apply to TFS, except it's not on the cloud. It's going to be on your own kit. Now, one of the significant things about Team Services is Microsoft are eating their own dog food with this thing. They're literally doing the DevOps thing. They're deploying new features every 3 weeks, and you'll see changes. So it's that whole cloud thing. You jump back into the UI, and it's completely changed all these new features. You can jump on to Bing, should I say, and search for Team Services Features Timeline, and you'll find something like this. And also TFS, sorry, is catching up on a quarterly basis. So just because you're in the TFS world, you don't need to feel left out. As long as you're with TFS 15, you'll get most of those changes apart from the ones that apply directly to the cloud. So I hope that's shown you that DevOps and VSTS can deliver some continuous value to your end users. I've just put up, for those of you that are going to go through my slides later, I've just put up a few DevOps resources that will help you climb into what I've been talking about deeper. Of course, I've only brushed the surface. There's a couple of other talks on this tool. I really recommend you go along to them, and they'll dive into things deeper. Again, this will all be online, so don't worry about taking pictures of it. It'll all be online, very easy to get. Yep, please fill out your feedback forms. I'd love to know whether I was absolutely terrible or half good. That'd be great. Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.